Command Share. I'm your host, Sheldon Menery, founding member of the Commander Rules Committee. Each episode, I'm joined by one of my RC compatriots, and we break the show into two blocks. First, in the command block, we talk about the RC's high-level decisions, our thought processes, and how we're shaping the Commander format. Then in the share block, we lean back, talk about the decks, the techs, the cards, all the things that the RC brings to bear in the kind of games that we like to play. In this episode, I'm joined by RC co-founder Gavin Duggan. Gavin, have a seat in the command chair.
Thank you.
So for all the rules, for all the news folks, why don't you update everybody on your commander resume?
Sure. I've been playing Commander for about 15, 20 years. Sheldon and I were there when I was working as a judge at the beginning, as a level 3 judge, and then a net rep, and then a regional coordinator. And that was sort of my magic tenure. And then we've been working on the format and the rules and the RC since the beginning.
So for the folks who don't know, the Commander RC, or the EDH RC as we called it back then, was your idea.
Yeah, one of my wife likes to joke that I have 10 ideas a day, and one of them are good, and that's a pretty good ratio. And that was one of the better ones, was to just try and, hey, let's set up some structure and set a conversation group, because in general decisions are better when you talk to more people, and so if we could provide some leadership and some guidance, then that would be good.
Now, you also have, among the four of us, the most thrilling real-life job. Anything that you can share about it?
Yeah, I mean, so I do artificial intelligence research for Google, specifically in the health arena. So we're trying to make tools, machine learning and things, analytical tools to help doctors, to help nurses, to help patients make sure that their data is safe and effective and working for them. And we have a lot of tools and a lot of algorithms which are pretty powerful, and that we can help do diagnosis, that we can help do analytics, that we can help expedite things. So we're really trying to improve the patient journey, not just in America, but around the world.
That sounds like it's just on a day-to-day basis. I mean, obviously you have to go to meetings and stuff, but the work that you're doing just sounds like it's really exciting.
It feels good. It's definitely one of those. No matter what job you have, there's always grindy parts, but it's definitely a job where I get up in the morning and I'm like, okay, let's go do some good.
So if Toby is the rules guy and Scott is the WotC insider and I'm the spokesperson, what do you see as your RC job?
I guess I'm the troublemaker. So I'm probably the disruptive force. If you're the architect, then I'm the oracle. So I mean, I'm definitely trying to sort of look out, as we all are, for the health. But in general, I think change and dynamic environments are interesting. And so looking for opportunities to improve, looking for opportunities to shake things up, not to break things, but to make sure that things are always living and dynamic. And like you and I both, as stronger personalities on the RC, it helps to have those oppositional forces where we're talking to each other and we're sort of evaluating each other's ideas.
Yeah, you never want to surround yourself with just people who agree with you.
Right. You want the same principles but different perspectives.
Exactly. Now, speaking of perspectives, you're the only RC member that has a kid. So
yeah.
How do you think that having a child, or being a parent, I guess, brings a difference to the perspective that you leverage with the RC?
So yeah, I have a 7-year-old little boy. He's wonderful. And the most important perspective he gives me on Commander is that every minute you can spend playing the game is important. Seize it. Because time is hard to come by. But no, there's a lot that changes. He's great, and he plays Magic with us. There's an expression I use that when I was a kid, not going to quote the famous poem, but when I was a kid, I sort of thought in like minutes and hours. I would think about what game do I want to play now? What do I want to do this afternoon? Where do I want to go on my bike ride in the next half an hour? And then I became a teenager and I started thinking about school and days and weeks. What homework do I have this week? And then I was an adult and I started planning in weeks and months. And when I spend time with him as a kid, he thinks in seconds and minutes. And he pulls me into that, focus on the moment, focus on now. And that extends into games, it extends into a lot of things. Like pay attention to life as it's going by because those minutes are precious. And filling them with laughter, whether it's Commander or jokes or anything else, is the best thing.
That's a great perspective. So why don't we move into the command block, and we're going to talk today about alternate formats. So one of your other things is you're big on alternate or format variations. But we're going to start with alternate cards, namely silver bordered. So when somebody asks you directly, what do you tell them about why silver bordered cards aren't legal?
Yeah, so I love cards. I love variety of cards, whether it's altered cards that are altered art, variations on a theme in terms of silver bordered. So when people ask me like, hey, why isn't silver bordered legal all the time? I try to explain that not just for the silver border thing, but cards, rules in general. Commander rules are a meeting post. They're a place where people can gather and then maybe move to one direction or another to find their game, to find the things that they're fun with. But all things being equal, or if they can't find a place to agree, then they play at the meeting post. And silver bordered cards aren't the kind of thing that people should be expected to allow. They're the kind of things that you should talk about, try, have fun with. But if you can't, agreeing on what's funny is maybe even harder than agreeing on what's fun. And so allowing people to say, well, no, maybe we don't quite agree on which of these silver bordered cards are fun. There's a lot of variation, and those corners not everybody reacts well to. So they're not the kind of thing people should be expected to allow. They're the kind of things you should be able to convince people to allow.
Tell somebody why you think the silver bordered cards, or at least the ones that you want to play, are fun. Because there are a lot of them that can be pretty miserable, or they're jokes that get less funny each time that you tell them.
Right. Any joke, you want to talk about things I've learned from having a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old, is that the same joke is funny the first time. It's not the 10th time, and it's somewhere in the middle it fell off the road, probably around the 3rd time, which means silver bordered cards can be great, but you probably don't want to break them out regularly, especially the same cards. Now, big decks, we know that variation is good in what we play and what we do, but they're not the kind of thing that we want to encourage people to rely on. And yeah, you should have to convince people this is going to be fun, and trust me. And if they trust you, great, give it a shot. And if it was, they'll probably let you do it again. But if it's not, we want it to be a little bit easier for those little bit more awkward cards to say no thanks.
Yeah, I don't think I ever actually want to sit down in a game where state-based actions aren't in effect. And there's one from the set before last that I like.
Rules lawyer.
Yeah.
You don't want to sit down to that game. You want to stand up for that game. It's silly, it's funny, it's laughable once, but it's taxing. So that'll do.
So there was the Silver December back in 2017 when we let them loose for a month, corresponding with the release of that set, Unglued. So
yeah,
why don't we walk through for the folks what led us to that decision?
So all right, so that was, full credit goes to Toby for that one. It was Toby's idea where we were at Gen Con, and we were I think it was Gen Con. We were walking through the hallway talking about some stuff and how silver border cards are interesting, and they came up, and there's this the conversation about, well, aren't these kind of what Commander's all about? Well, no, yes. And one of the big topics of the day, whether you should try to break Commander or not, ebbs and flows as a sort of a popular topic. And we had this funny conversation about how maybe the best way to share the message wasn't with specific words or with rules, but with examples. It doesn't have to be a permanent example, but if we were to let silver bordered cards, loose for a little while, people would it would shake people out of their reverie a bit and be like, oh, maybe, what is it? But that's really silly. Yes, that's really silly.
Intentionally so.
Intentionally so, and be considerate, but don't be too serious. And so I seized on that idea, and I was just like, yes, this is a brilliant way to convey nuanced examples and leadership without trying, without rules or words. Let's show instead of tell. And it took some convincing, but I think it worked out really well.
Yeah, we still banned about 12 of the cards. It's like you can't play with these. Some of them were dexterity cards. We didn't want people taking their pants off for denim walk, things like that.
Yes, and there were the jerk cards. In general, I'm not a fan of trying to regulate bad behavior. Advise, lead, but regulating fun is really tricky. So we didn't think that we would need to, come down hard against things like shooting Nerf guns at your opponent's $1,000 deck. Some people were just desperate. We shook some people out of their reverie, and they reacted badly, and they declared that they were going to try and wreck things, and so we had to provide a little bit of extra leadership and say no, don't.
Yeah, if you ever, and it's sort of a general message for folks, if you ever disagree with a decision or you want to offer us the opinion that you think this is that something that we are talking about is a bad idea, don't go ruin the experience for a bunch of other people. Just tell us why you think the experience would be miserable. There's no reason to share the misery, as it were.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I took notes on who was actually talking about doing that. Like, I know those names, and like those people would have to do some pretty good work to convince me that I want to play with them.
So, why do you think it was better that this time around that we didn't do that with Unsanctioned?
I think we could have done. I think this wasn't as much of a set. These were a few cards. It wasn't as coherent of a sort of release, and so there wasn't as much of a party. There wasn't as much of a vibe around Uncards for a while, and it was really that vibe that we were trying to both cash in on, and capitalize, ride that wave. And there wasn't as much of a wave this time. So, as you'll learn if you try surfing, you've got to choose the right wave. And I think also, it had only been a couple of years. I guess maybe it had been 4 years.
Yeah, it was 2017 was the December that we did that. Yeah,
so 3 years, 2.5 years. It's a little short. I think
well, it was a convenient time of the year to do it.
Yes.
Unlike today, it was a time when people were home, where they normally weren't.
Right.
Over the holidays.
Silver border cards don't play so well over camera.
Yeah. I think you're right on capturing the sort of essence of the vibe that Unglued came out with, whereas Unsanctioned didn't seem to have the same kind of hoopla surrounding it, and it was just like at a more awkward time of the year and in the release schedule.
Yeah. So it's I think it's about paying attention to the sort of the zeitgeist of the format, and I definitely think that it might be fun to try again sometime, but we don't want to do it too often.
Yeah, read the room. Definitely read the room. So if anybody has tuned into the RC stream, they've already seen us play with silver bordered cards. You keep threatening to bring your Grand Calculatron deck, which you haven't.
Yes, that's coming up soon.
And Toby famously played his Baron von Count deck and was killed by it not once but twice.
Yes, he got his own Baron von Doom Count pointed back at his own head in the it couldn't have gone better in terms of the story of that character.
Yeah. So what's the nickel version of your Ground Calculatron deck?
I mean, it was a little bit of a statement of just saying, hey, you can build fun things. This is one of the things that Mark Rosewater and I agree on, that it's, this is a good example of a fun card. I mostly built it out of cards that I had around the house. It was a wander around, flip through some stuff, flip through piles of cards. This looks fun, that looks fun. It's not...
Do you commonly find Magic cards in the freezer and stuff?
Yes. I occasionally find Magic cards in the freezer, and I commonly find cards lying around everywhere else. My wife is very patient with me. But yeah, we sort of put that together, and one of the things that it was very much meant to be a shared experience. So there's that common thread of, if you're going to try and be funny, don't also try to break things. That won't be funny. Like, pick your battles. Are you trying to be funny, or are you trying to be showy, or are you trying to do different things? There was a great moment the first time I played it where I had a stalking tiger, which is it's like a 2/2 or a 3/3 artifact creature, and you put a booster underneath it. And then when the booster dies, or when the creature dies, you get to open the booster, choose one of the cards, put it in your hand. And I had a pack of unhinged or unglued. I think it might have actually been unglued. That someone had given me as a going away gift. Someone from the Sentry Box had given me as a going away gift when I left Calgary. And so I put it under this stalking tiger when I was playing this big silly game at work and things were going on. And then, of course, someone plays a threaten effect targeting my stalking tiger, looks me in the eye and says, "Would you like to concede?" And I was like, "No, you got it. It's yours." So he stole the creature, sacked the stalking tiger, opened the pack, got, I don't remember what, some silly silver bordered card, put it in his hand, and good times were had.
So it's the card Grand Calcutron is very reminiscent of another Richard Garfield game, Robo Rally.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, the man has a number of accomplishments on his record, and a lot of people who play one don't actually know that much about the others. But Robo Rally has the same kind of concept as Grand Calcutron, where every time you draw a card for Grand Calcutron, you have to decide where in your hand it's going to go, and then you have to play the card at the front of your hand before you can play the next card. So
you're basically writing your program as you're going along.
Yeah, you write your program and then adapt it as it goes. In the vein of reading the room, one of the reasons I haven't played it yet on stream is just I wanted to sort of establish. I don't know how it'll go. It could be a complete mess. It could be that the game is just like not great. And you and I have talked recently about how I like cards which mess with my opponent's plan a little bit. I like putting people off their game so that I can find avenues to attack. But cards that knock your opponent off their game are disruptive and can be frustrating. So I don't want to do them too much or too often.
That's a fine balance, isn't it? You try to find you don't want to just let everybody do exactly what they want all the time, because then they're just going to crush you. But then taking too much of the game away is also bad. So you I think it's always a very careful balance that you have to find in the middle there someplace.
Yeah, and you also need to trust your friends, or ask your friends to trust you, the people you're playing with. So, I mean, on stream, I have played Decree of Annihilation, Dovescape, and a Nath plus Sadistic Hypnotist combo, which stripped everybody's hand and made like 30 creatures, and then, Garuked. As it turns out, Scott killed me with my own creatures, but those are big splashy plays. Some of them landed well, some of them didn't. Like the Dovescape play that we played last week went really well. I think it went really well for me, and it's that's an interesting card because it lets people still do something, but maybe not the thing they wanted to do. So, of course, I just make my birds bigger than everyone's. So, yeah, Grand Calcutron is in the same vein. And I haven't broken it out yet because it is very disruptive to the game. So I want to make sure that people are having fun and that we're on a good roll before throwing too many monkey wrenches in the world.
One of the things about that is that you play with your hand revealed in front of you. So that's just, in a webcam game, that's extra real estate that you have to eat up.
Yep.
To get it moving. So yeah, I guess we'll see. So look forward to Gavin playing his Grand Calcutron deck on the stream at some time in the let's call it near future.
Sure, sounds good. As I did say at the top of the hour, I guess my role is the enfant terrible of the RC. So
let's move into our feature, Hidden Gems. So the folks that come on the show have been playing the format for a long time. I suppose we, play some cards that many players have never heard of. We discuss one of those cards each week in our feature segment, Hidden Gems. Now, I suspect that you've gone pretty far afield for yours. What do you have?
So I actually, when people ask me for card recommendations, especially like esoteric card recommendations, I really like to try and find budgety cards that aren't 20-30 bucks that are a big ask to add. And one card that I think is a bit of an underrepresented gem is, and I'm holding up, Spectral Searchlight. Also, its silver bordered cousin, Mad Science Fair Project. They basically do the same thing. Spectral Searchlight it's a 3 mana rock, 5 colors, and there's a whole class of those, and you have to choose which ones are good. But Spectral Searchlight is great because it lets you give mana to somebody else if you want to. And this is the kind of positive politics that plays really well for like soft nudges to behavior in the game. Being able to give someone a little bit of mana, not strictly to help them out, but to help yourself. Oh, you could play Wrath if you had an extra white? I can help with that. Oh, you could do something spectacular, or you could break up this combo. You could counter Sheldon's proliferating Rolesk. I can help with that. And putting it out there, people pay a little bit more attention to you, and they just subconsciously have a little bit better of a perspective of you in their head. So I really like it.
What does it tell you about the folks who will ask if you'll give them the mana? Does it give you any kind of read on them?
Sometimes yes. Trust is earned in drops and spent in buckets. And one of the cool things about little cards like this, like Spectral Searchlight, is it lets you start the trust chain. It's a small thing for me to say, yeah, sure, have a blue. With Mad Science Fair projects, it's a little bit harder because it's roll a die or flip a coin, 50-50. Maybe you get colorless, maybe you get colored. But offering people a little bit of mana here and there throughout the game, they ask you for it. There's that old psychological trick that if there's someone that you're arguing with and you want to bring them around to your side, ask them to do you a favor. Because the cognitive dissonance will either get them, if they don't want to say no, but at the same time, when they do it, it sort of brings you around. It helps build that bridge. It opens up the conversation.
That's a cool card. I like the idea of. Well, I mean, it expands on the sort of cooperative aspect of the game, right? We can tell a different story if we're all sort of in the same boat, and if I'm helping you or you're helping me, then the tide has lifted, at least for the two of us.
Yeah, and I'm still going to fireball you. Like right out of the game when the time comes, I am going to use that mana accelerant for my good more than yours. But having a small favors to give around is an interesting aspect. How about you? You got anything interesting?
Yeah, I'm gonna I brought up a card that you played on game one of the stream last week, Shriveling Rod. It's from Darksteel. It's a rare. It's 2 black for an instant, and you can choose one. Until end of turn, whenever a creature is dealt damage, destroy it. Or, okay. Until end of turn, whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller loses life equal to its toughness. And for 2 and a B, it has Entwine. This has been one of my favorite cards for a long time, and even though it killed me, it did me no end of joy to see you play it.
It's a funny one. I mean, it's worth noting in terms of budget cards. I mean, it is a 2-cent rare. And yeah, it's an instant. The number of times you can just, if you're careful, you can blast the table for a solid 30 or 40 damage when someone wraths, and then you just, in response, I think I'll do this.
Yeah. Certainly if somebody has played a blasphemous act or something, you're going to be able to both kill the other things that didn't get killed for some reason, and then just dome everybody for a big bunch. It's a surprise. It's one of those cards that the first time you play it with somebody who hasn't seen it, they're like, "Let me see that again," and they take notes, and then they go, "Yeah." They're looking it up on their phone as we're shuffling up for the next game, and like you said, they find out that it's 2 cents, so they ordered themselves a foil copy before the game is finished.
The first mode is harder to use. Like, it's occasionally nice where you throw it into combat between 2 other players, where someone attacks you and you've got a couple of dorks, and you're like, I will block your 7/7 and your 9/9 with my 2/1/1s, and also death becomes you.
It's sort of a pseudo death touch.
Yeah. out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Surprise Death Touch is better than Death Touch.
Right. Well, we've gone into the mines and found some hidden gem. Here's hoping that it inspires you to do a little spelunking of your own. Now we're going to move into the share block, and we're going to actually talk about actual format variations. So Commander has a relatively well-defined rule set and ban list. So if you're playing official or baseline Commander, you have a structure to work with, and we alluded to that back in the beginning. But there are also alternate versions. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but the first question is going to be the most controversial. Is high-powered or CDH Commander a baseline Commander, or is it a variant?
All right, I'm going to play bad cop. I think it's a variant. It's not the thing that you should be expected to allow when you sit down if you can't agree otherwise. So I mentioned earlier about silver bordered cards. The base rules for me are the things where we sit, we chat for a couple of minutes, and if we can't really agree, at least hopefully we can shuffle up and have a game using the base rules. And CDH falls outside the lines for me on that. You should never, if you're a CDH player, and all the good CDH players I've met acknowledge this 100%. They all get that you should always have a CDH deck, and then if you're going to play with new people, have an interesting sort of baseline interactive. I shouldn't say interesting, a goofy deck to play with. And if you can't find another CDH player, don't expect people to play it with you. Don't require it.
Yeah, I agree with your point that most of the good CDH players that I've met don't want to play their decks against regular decks. Their raison d'etre isn't to pub stomp people; it's to have the challenge of a high-powered game. So
absolutely,
they'll either have another deck, at big events. They'll either have another deck, or they'll have one of their own kind to lend to you if you want to play alongside. At one of the SCG cons, I sat down and played with one of the groups, and there was thinking involved.
Oh yes, I mean it is. CEDH is very popular among the analytical end of the spectrum. That people who really like thinking hard and solving and looking for optimizations and looking for ways to break and tweak. A CDH applies to that. Those folks are smart, and they can see, as long as they've got even a little bit of sort of self-awareness, they can see that finding people to play in that same arena is what they're looking for. They can solve for social in that sense.
Yeah, I think there are some folks that they're under the misapprehension that we dislike the people that play CDH. We don't. We want everybody to be happy playing sort of in the corner of the format that they're happy with. There are things about the high-powered spectrum that become problematic in a bigger picture, but that doesn't mean we dislike that we dislike it or we dislike them. It's just not what we've chosen to focus on as the core of the format.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the format has stability issues. I think that there's a little bit of I am not convinced that CDH is necessarily stable. I think it may sort of have difficulties, stumble along, and occasionally require resets. We'll see how that goes. And in general, I worry, if we're being honest, about CDH players trying to poach from the larger format. That there is a danger of accelerating the arms race. But in general, they're good people. They're playing for fun. They're just playing a game they like, and that's great.
Well, part of it is that it's self-limiting, right? There are very few actual budget CDH decks.
Yes.
So it would be hard to get everybody. It's like vintage. There are limiting factors, and cost is one of those limiting factors. All right.
Unfortunately, it's handicapped.
Yeah.
So we shall see. But there are many variations.
Yeah. So why don't we move on to talking about actual other variants? What are some of your favorites?
So we had a stream where we all played the 10 ticket deck. There's a good 10 ticket community, which is a great way of sort of limiting. Plane Chase is fun. Plane Chase Draft is one that I don't get to do very often, but it's fantastic.
Explain what plane chase draft is. Are you drafting planes or are you drafting decks?
You draft planes. You can also draft decks if you want, but not everybody has like 4 hours. But yeah, as I've said on a number of occasions, Plane Chase is great if the planes that if when you planeswalk, you go to a plane that is good for you, and that is the major caveat with the way a lot of people play Plane Chase, which is that you go to a random plane. So I have a bunch of different ways that I've designed over the years to try and make it so that there's more control over where you go when you planeswalk. The planar map I've talked about a lot. I love it. It's called the Blind Eternities. The plane draft is basically you either booster draft or even better Rochester draft, Winchester draft. If you've ever seen a Winchester draft, where you basically just take 3 piles and look at a card, look at one pile, and if you like it, keep it and replace it with a card. If you don't like it, put it back, put another plane on top of it, and look at a different pile. And so the piles get bigger until somebody is like, all right, you know what? There's 4 planes in this pile. I'm just going to take it and figure it out later. And you draft say 15 planes each, choose 10 of them, and then you've got your planes to play with. And it's different every time. It's very adaptive. It's just like limited. Super interesting way to use Plane Chase.
So I have my planes. You have your planes. How do we determine which plane we're on?
So you start on a random plane. I personally like this solution where whoever's going second, you start on the top plane of their deck. Because I like giving advantages to the player going second. I think that one of the remaining flaws in Magic is the go first imbalance. But you can just choose one of the planes at random from either me. Flip a coin, and if you win, you get to choose. Do you want to play first, draw first, or plane first? But the same as the original Plane Chase rules. You have a deck of 10 planes, I have a deck of 10 planes, and whenever I roll the die, if I hit the planar symbol, the planeswalk symbol, we're now on the top of my deck, and if we were on your deck, it goes away.
Yeah, I don't actually think I've ever played the way that it was originally intended. I think I've always played with just a pile of planes in the middle.
It's okay, but I'm honestly not that big of a fan. It's interesting, but it's very, very, very random. And
I can absolutely imagine.
The whole point of Plane Chase is to inject a little bit of randomness into whatever type of Magic you're playing. Playing with one big stack of planes in the middle is mainlining that stuff.
All right, that's Plane Chase. How much Pauper have you played? I mean, we played 10 Ticks, which is basically a version of Pauper, right? It's
like Pauper. You can pull in some interesting rares, just not like the really good stuff. Not the really expensive stuff.
Like Shriveling Rod.
Shriveling Rod, like you name it. There's all sorts of great stuff.
Have you played any Emperor?
I used to play Emperor. I actually thought it was funny. I played a game of Pyramid once, where Pyramid is Emperor is really interesting as long as nobody's allowed to build their deck, assuming that they're going to be playing Emperor. Like Two-Headed Giant. Again, if you build a deck for regular Commander and then use it for Two-Headed Giant, you're going to have a good time. If you build a deck to break Two-Headed Giant, you're going to trip over yourself before you even start the game. Emperor's the same way. Pyramid is a logistical nightmare. You need 12 players, and you have 3 on the front row, 2 on the second row, and 1 on the back row, who's like the super Emperor. Yeah, that game took a while.
Yeah. I can only imagine how complicated that got.
It was pretty tricky. There's Pentagram is actually one of my favorite ways to play Commander.
I was actually going to bring that one up.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Pentagram is basically the idea that if you have 5 players, and often people want to restrict a Commander game to 4 players because 5-player Chaos starts to take a long time. But there's this great way of playing called Pentagram that's faster than a regular 4-player Chaos game. Each player you sit in a circle. Each player has 2 opponents. They are the players across from them, and then 2 non-opponents. They're not your allies per se, but they're not your opponents. And those are the 2 sitting beside you. And the game is over when somebody has no opponents. If if two players simultaneously have no opponents, you can either declare it a draw, or you can say whoever knocked out the last player wins. So there's actually less politics than there is in Chaos 4-player, multiplayer, or 5-player, because you know what your job is. Those two people, they need to die.
And of course, there's somebody that we call them allies when we play it, but there's somebody that you're allied with who you have a common enemy with. And then there's somebody that you're allied with who is an ally of your other enemy.
They're an ally of your other enemy. They're also an enemy of your other ally. The person sitting to your left is your friend, but they are the enemy of your other ally. There's a little bit of there's some rules implications. For example, you can't attack your allies. You can't fact or fiction your allies. You have to choose one of the two players across from you.
Yeah, anything that says opponent.
Flows more nicely.
Anything that says opponent goes for the two people across from you. Obviously, all players means all players, but there are some restrictions on what you can do with your allies. You can't block for them, for example, although there have been variants where you can actually do that.
Yes.
Which, it ramps up some of the chaos, right?
It does, and that definitely is making sure everybody has defenses, etc. There was a rule in Emperor that I really liked where if you attacked one of your teammates, they would gain control of your creature if it did damage. And so you could pass your creatures around either from the back row to the front row or from the left to the right. Yeah, it actually played really well.
Oh man, that probably lends itself to some pretty complicated strategic implications, because if you attack the person, you weaken them, but then you strengthen their position by giving them stuff to defend against the other. Huh.
Well, you wouldn't do damage per se. The idea was that there was essentially a rule which said if one of your creatures would deal damage to a non-opponent, you were allowed to attack them. Instead, they gain control of that creature. Of course, there's a trick that, like you said, there's strategic implications to this. That if let's say the turn order is going from left to right. Usually it goes left, west opponents, middle opponents, east opponents is the turn order. If I'm attacking from left, I attack from the left flanker to the Emperor, and then from the Emperor to the right flanker. That person immediately gets to untap and use that creature. So it's a much faster transition than if you're attacking from right to left, where they have to wait for their turn to come around and untap. So you have effectively what we used to call the weak side flanker and the strong side flanker. This is a rugby reference. That was one of my games. And so, yeah, I like little tweaks to the rules that sort of shake things up. It's kind of like playing ring games in poker.
You can expand on that.
Sure. Ring games are just a ring game in poker is this idea that you might play Texas Hold'em and then 7-card draw and then 7-card stud and then Raz and then pineapple. Or different variations. There's 100 different variations for every game you can think of. Choose your favorite board game. You can probably add a little rule to make a tweak to it. We should see if we can come up with a way of tweaking Terraforming Mars for you sometime. That is still interesting, but add a little bit of variation to it.
So earlier you talked about the Blind Eternities Map, and this is one that I wanted to circle back around as we close up this segment. Tell everybody about the very, very fun and very chaotic Blind Eternities Map.
So the idea behind the Blind Eternities Map is that it's a format which is a little more chaotic and definitely more dynamic, but not a lot more chaotic. And the idea is you can do a quick web search and find the rules. There's an article on the Mothership that I wrote like 5 years ago now, I guess, maybe longer. That the idea is that you start on a plane, and then you reveal the planes in each of the 4 Cartesian directions, north, south, east, west, around it on the table. And then when someone rolls the planar symbol, the planeswalk symbol on the die, they get to choose the direction that they're moving, north, south, east, or west. There's some additional rules which make things balance out in terms of like running away from places. But that's the gist of it, and it gives you a lot of control. So the rules are constantly changing, but not in a completely unpredictable way. People will know they're coming usually, They can choose to try and run away from a particular plane if there's a place that's not working for them, or if they're terrified of it, or if they're low life and it's going to do damage, or they can run towards somewhere that has a wrath effect if the board is getting really clogged up. So you have options that are dynamic that wouldn't normally be relevant, but now you get to choose about them.
Right, you get to choose the direction that you planeswalk into, north, south, east, west. But also, if you don't like any of those, you can fly off into a blind direction, if you will.
Yeah, so we wanted to give the Blind Eternities and I developed this with a little bit of help from Alex Kenny, formerly of the Rules Committee, that there was a couple of reasons we added this rule, but the short version is you can move diagonally to an empty square on the map. And we called that Hell Riding. It's a reference to a fabulous series of books by a gentleman named Roger Zelazny. And you can move diagonally, and then you fill in this unknown plane and the ones around that. And there's a limit. You should probably put a limit on how big your map gets, just so you don't run out of table space. You have to shift things around a bit. There are smaller versions where you just play with north and south. You don't have east and west as well. So you're sort of running up and down a strip of planes. We did a two-dimensional map once where we took turns building the map. We started with a random plane, and then my opponent put one north, and I put one south, and then he put one further north, and I put one further south, until we had like this strip of 10 planes that got... The closer he got to my territory, the more advantageous it got for me. So there's all these different variations you can play where you spread the planes out and give people some choices. Original Plane Chase, where you actually just bring a deck of 10 planes of your choice, is fantastic. It has, you have to have the planes available, but give it a shot.
So with the Blind Eternities, there's also an online tool that you can use to track where you are.
Yeah, there's a couple of online implementations of it. There's one that we use when we're playing on the Thursday stream. We'll probably do it again, maybe this week or next, if people want to drop by and check it out. It sort of takes care of the paperwork for you. As with all online implementations of board games, it's polite to play it if you have access to the cards physically, if you own the cards, or if you own the board game. And if you enjoy it, go and grab a set of planes. I want more people to buy the planes so that we get more Plane Chase sets.
Now, if I remember correctly, the only way to do it with the online tool is in a 3-player version.
If you're playing with something like the online camera stream games, it works better if you dedicate one of the 4 streams to the map itself. I think they're working on a version where people can spectate the map, so that we could have 4 players, and then in another window that would be the map, and then you can flip the map up on camera whenever something interesting is happening.
Right. I would imagine that you could use the Scryfall window that Streamlabs has to put up the plane that you're on so you can see it, but that wouldn't help you see the other planes that you can walk to. Because remember, in this, you can go back to a place that you've already been.
Yes. It's very important that you can get into these, you really have this advantage that if you roll the die once, twice, hey, if you want to pay 6 mana for this, when you hit, you can go to somewhere that you can almost always go to somewhere that's really good for you. And that's a great feeling.
Or Goat Plane. Everybody wants to go to the Goat Plane.
Nobody wants to go to Otaria. That's what we know.
What's the one where you sacrifice a creature every upkeep? Nobody wants to go to that one either.
Oh, that's not so bad. I like that one. That gets rid of the player who's going tall instead of wide. It's just his board gets chomped or her board gets chomped up. It's places like the Eon Fog, which can really mess with you.
Ugh. It's meant... One of the things that Plane Chase does, and I think that, you've said this when we played with it on the stream, is that it sort of evens the playing field, because you never know what you're going to get into, and suddenly somebody's relatively casual deck can be the power at the table.
Yes, I really like Plane Chase in the map, and variants in general, but I find the Blind Eternities map is particularly good for this, that a finely tuned strategy is a less flexible strategy. So the more tuned and precise and optimized a deck is, the more difficulty it will have adapting to the vagaries of the Blind Eternities, which means it's really good for putting decks that are on different power levels on relatively even footings.
So that's the Blind Eternities. Any other variants that you want to talk about before we punch out of here?
I mean, I think there's all sorts of fun things. I mean, you have a podcast you do, I think, with Anthony Alongi. He developed a schema of animals, of evaluating cards on the basis of animal-like properties many years ago. The gorilla cards, the pigeon cards, the spider cards, and these types of things. There's a really great format that revolves around that called the Menagerie, where you play cards that have these different properties, and you have to balance out which animals you have in your menagerie. So there's things that mess with deck building. There are formats that mess with playing rules. There are formats that mess with time, like just the definition of a game. So you can have a game, a variant. It's more of a rule than a variant, but it's an interesting one that I saw someone play once, where they basically, you were allowed to discard an end card combo from your hand and get 1 point at any given time in the game, and then essentially cycle it. So if you had a 2-card combo in your hand that would win the game, or on the battlefield and in your hand, you could discard those cards, draw replacements, and gain 1 point for each of those. And the game didn't end, it just kept going. And then at the end, whoever had the most points had foregone the most opportunities to end the game unceremoniously.
You know,
Yeah.
I was thinking, as we're talking about variants, it didn't occur to me that it would qualify as a variant, but it does. We've often played that the monarch is a live thing in the game, and we've started with first blood gets to be the monarch, or that player number 4 is automatically the monarch. So I guess monarch is a variant that we could potentially run.
Let's try that on stream this week. I think it sounds it's been bandied around for the past year or so as sort of a very popular twist, and I think it's pretty cool to call it a throne war.
All right, well, we've been sitting in this chair long enough, and it's time to wrap this episode. If you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to follow, like, subscribe, and ring those bells. We'd hate for you to miss an episode. Gavin, you want to tell these folks where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, so Genomancer is my Twitter handle, and you can find me there and send me a message. And I also just come and hang out on the Twitch chat with us on Thursdays, and I try to keep that up on the screen and chat with people there, answer questions. So those are places I try to be available.
Of course, I'm on Twitter and Facebook by my name at Sheldon Menery. Please tune into my other show that Gavin referenced, Commander Community, with Anthony Alongi every Monday here on Star City Games and on YouTube. On Thursdays, 8 p.m., also as Gavin referenced, here in the U.S., that's Eastern Time. You can catch the two of us, along with Toby Elliott and Scott Larrabee, on the Commander RC Twitch channel, and you never know who's going to show up for Game 2 and Game 3. That's twitch.tv/Commander RC. And then finally, on Sundays, you can find me right here on StarCityGames.com, writing about the best format in Magic history. We'll see you next time on the Command Chair. As always, I'm Sheldon Menery.